Hey guys, what's up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today I'm making the video a little bit earlier, like I said, because of course, after market closes, we have the Tesla's numbers essentially coming out. Then we have the actual call about an hour and a half or so later. So I kind of want to, make sure I'm kind of, ready for that, not recording while that's happening because I want to see it as it happens. Nonetheless, a little bit of an earlier video today, but I don't think the market's going to do a whole lot more in the last half an hour. So regardless, Tesla's most likely going to be up about a 1% for the day, probably closing at 740 something. Probably might fall closer to the end of the day. So I would, at the moment, guess like maybe 741-ish. That's my current guess as to where Tesla's going to close, maybe 740. Somewhere around 740 is my guess. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is the fact that Tesla's up about 1% today, right? So let's talk about it. What can we expect, right? So the earnings, of course, is something that can be quite interesting in terms of what actually happens to the stock price itself, mainly because, well, almost no one knows what the earnings will be, what they will report, how good, how bad, how maybe even neutral. Well, one thing to keep in mind that's important to look at is something like this. I want to show you guys very quickly, right? You want to look at implied moves and whatnot, right? So he's just taking a poll. These are the most common or the most popular option chains currently with the highest open interest, right? So you can see 800 and 750 calls for Friday. And then, of course, they have 700 and 740 puts for this Friday, right? So slightly more calls or slightly less calls than puts, but, it's pretty much equal. And the implied move for tomorrow is just under 7%. The last 8 earnings, the average move was only 4.2%, which is pretty funny. But nonetheless, that's kind of what's implied. Essentially what that means is, again, after the earnings are reported, the market is currently essentially with options and whatnot pricing in for Tesla to move about 6 to 7%, whether it's up or down. Right? That's what it's pricing in, which is why the options premiums and stuff like that are kind of a little bit more juiced right now, especially for, even just for this Friday. So let's talk about it, right? Ultimately, guys, from yesterday, not much has changed because Tesla really hasn't done a whole lot today, right? Ultimately, we're still in between these two little lines, the blue line and the red line, right? We broke out of the blue line, which was great. That was kind of a little bear wedge we were in. But now we're, of course, getting rejected by the slightly higher resistance, which, of course, is this red line that we got rejected over here. Now that's going to be acting as a resistance until we break through. Ultimately, again, regardless of what happens on earnings, unless earnings are like horribly bad, I personally believe that even if we drop off on earnings, let's say we drop to like, I don't know, 710 or something like that, whatever, just as an example, which by the way, if let's say we do drop about 5 to 6%, that would put us, somewhere around like 710-ish, like very low, like low 700s. Even if that were to happen, I personally still believe, ultimately, based on just how the market looks, the market still looks a little bit strong. Not that, it means that tomorrow or the next day it'll happen, but the point is, I personally believe probably by the end of the month, ultimately, Tesla has a decent chance of still kind of running up to somewhere in the high 700s. I definitely think that's still possible. But again, the major thing that you want to pay attention to, if this is actually ever going to actually happen, is breaking this red line. I personally think once this red line is broken, and once we can especially break it and come back, retest it, kind of like what we did here, we broke through, came back, retested it, and then bounced up. As long as we can essentially replicate what we did right here, again on the red line, somewhere around this area here, that to me will pretty much signify that, there's a very good chance Tesla's going to run up to the high 700s, maybe even low 800s. That's personally what I'm currently expecting right now. So I don't really think that it matters that much what happens in earnings, because to me, the stock is telling me that, again, as long as we don't fall below the blue line, and especially if we can eventually break above the red line, we are running up to, again, around 800-ish, give or take, right? So that's kind of what I'm seeing at the moment. Again, looking at the major kind of, moving averages and whatnot, the short-term ones that dictate, short-term momentum and whatnot. 201 EMA, well above it. Bollinger Band, well above it. We're pretty close to the green line on the Bollinger Band, you can see, which is why I wouldn't be surprised if maybe earnings, kind of slaps us down, maybe back to the white line, then we bounce, which kind of coincides with the blue line. We bounce off of it once again, probably come back to the red line and then break through and then go up to 800. That's kind of what I'm projecting at the moment. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if that were to happen. So that's kind of what I'm seeing at the very moment. So we'll see what happens with that. If that happens, I am going to be selling more puts. But if not, then I have one put currently sold for next Friday for 700. And I'm happy to be with that. I don't want to be, too greedy. I don't want to go too crazy. I bought back everything else. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about that. Nonetheless, though, above the 50-day moving average, which is actually quite good in my opinion. 10 and 5, well above both of those as well. So ultimately, we're above every meaningful major moving average at the very moment, and I'm very happy about that. You can see the volume gets severely lower. So essentially, once we can clear this level, this 760 range especially, the volume starts getting much lower, and then I think that's kind of, it's going to help us push up to this 800 level potentially pretty easily. So that's kind of what I'm seeing at the moment, guys. Again, I want to make this video relatively quickly, and the main reason is because there's really not a whole lot to talk about that I haven't already talked about, right? The RSI is still pointing up, still looking pretty decent. Then we can go in the slightly shorter time frame, but there's really not that much to mention here as well, because the stock is kind of following what the RSI rather is kind of following what the stock is doing. Like, I wouldn't call it too crazy. I guess maybe you can consider the fact that this almost set like a higher high-ish, while the stock is technically a lower than this area back here. So that's kind of good. But ultimately, there's not like that much to talk about in the shorter time frame, because the stock has kind of been, you know, not doing too much recently. It hasn't really been developing too much recently either. So we're just kind of, you know, waiting. We're kind of seeing what happens after this earnings, in my opinion. But ultimately, based on just the daily technical analysis and the fact that we're above all these major moving averages, I'm personally overall still like short-term bullish, essentially for the rest of this month. Let's just say that roughly, give or take, right? I personally still think even if Tesla falls after earnings, as long as we don't collapse, essentially, to make it very simple, under 700, as long as 700 doesn't collapse and we don't fall below 700, I'm perfectly bullish and I'm feeling good. If we ever lose 700, and especially if we ever close below 700, that's when I'm going to start flipping you know, more and more bearish and a lot less bullish, of course. But again, as long as 700 doesn't break and we don't fall below 700, and especially if we can eventually break above this red line, which throughout this week, let's say, to make it simple, will be about 750, especially if we can close about 750, I would be like, right now I'm like fairly bullish, but I would be like quite bullish if that were to happen. And that's essentially what I'm seeing, guys. So good luck to anyone that's potentially playing the earnings. Again, none of this is financial advice. Do your own research, make your own decisions, but that's kind of what I'm seeing at the moment, guys. Hopefully it helps you. Again, sometimes I see really stupid comments that I honestly just remove because they're just really idiotic. They are like, yeah, all you do is say it'll go up or down. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's kind of actually what it will do. The idea behind stock analysis and technical analysis is you want to predict or try to understand, you know, which way is it potentially favoring? What's the higher percentage outcome? You know, is it 80-20 going up versus down, right? If it is, then good. The odds are, you know, from your perspective in your favor. You can play towards that. No one knows for sure if it's going to go up or down. And if you're looking for a channel that'll be like, yeah, it's going to go up 100%, it's going to go down 100%, and they nail literally every single move, well, they're probably the richest person on this planet, because that's quite literally impossible. So again, when I see those kind of comments, I quite literally just remove the person's comment and even remove them from the channel, because I just don't want to see that. It's just the dumbest comments. And I don't want those people watching these videos, essentially, is what I'm saying, because it's just so stupid. Like, come on, like, that's just not how it works, man. It's just completely idiotic and just very, very dumb. Anyways, that's kind of the point I want to say, guys. Again, we're trying to understand and predict the most likely outcome. That's how this works. But nonetheless, that's it for this video. Good luck to anyone playing the earnings. And yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Tomorrow will be interesting. Peace, peace, peace.